6:15 in the evening. The Philippine Sea. The Chinese aircraft carrier Shandong cut through the Pacific swells at 28 knots for 72 hours. The strike group had conducted a full-scale strike doctrine exercise against simulated American targets. This was the largest display of naval power in the region for a decade. But as the exercise reached its scheduled conclusion, a terrifying reality began to settle over the command staff on both sides of the ocean. 3 American Virginia-class submarines had been shadowing the Chinese group since it passed through the Luzon Strait. At 6 o'clock, all 3 boats missed their mandatory security check-ins with Pacific Command in Hawaii. They had vanished from the digital world. The evening sun sat low on the horizon. It turned the surface of the water into a sheet of orange glass. Beneath that glass, the ocean was a silent tomb. Inside the Combat Information Center of the Shandong, Admiral Wang watched the primary tactical display. His sonar technicians were reporting an anomaly. The constant, rhythmic acoustic signatures of the American attack submarines had stopped. There were no sounds of high-speed maneuvers, no sounds of blowing ballast. There was only the white noise of the open sea. Admiral Wang spoke to his chief of staff. His voice was calm but professional. He said, "The Americans will assume we have taken action against their boats. If they cannot find them, they will look at us first. Increase the fleet readiness to Condition 2. Launch the remaining J-15 fighters. We must secure our perimeter before the Americans arrive in force." 6,000 miles away, inside the secure, windowless rooms of Pearl Harbor, Admiral Robert Reed stood before a massive wall of monitors. The room was unusually quiet. The only sound was the hum of high-powered servers and the soft murmur of analysts. 3 red icons on the global map were blinking. Each icon represented a nuclear-powered attack submarine worth $3 billion. Each carried over 100 sailors. The admiral turned to his deputy. He said, "This is not a mechanical failure. We do not lose 3 boats simultaneously to equipment issues. This happened during a Chinese live-fire exercise. Every minute we wait is a minute they use to reposition their fleet. I want the carrier Abraham Lincoln to turn into the wind. I want every maritime patrol aircraft in the region over those last known coordinates." Now, high above the water, the air was thin and cooling. An American Boeing Pate Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft banked hard toward the west. The pilot looked down at the vast, empty expanse of the Pacific. Below him, the Chinese carrier strike group looked like a collection of sharp gray daggers. The radar on the Pate began to paint the Chinese ships. Within seconds, the Chinese search radars locked onto the American aircraft. The electronic warfare systems inside the cockpit began to scream. The situation was no longer a game of shadows. It was a confrontation between 2 of the most powerful military forces in human history. Both nations were now operating on a hair trigger. The silence in the deep was about to be filled by the sounds of a world preparing for a conflict it was not ready to fight. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 7:45 in the evening. The Joint Intelligence Center Pacific in Hawaii was a hive of controlled desperation. Analysts leaned into their monitors. Their faces were pale under the fluorescent lights. They were looking for the acoustic fingerprints of 3 Virginia-class submarines. The Sound Surveillance System, known as SOSUS, is an underwater network of hydrophones spanning the ocean floor. It is designed to hear a single bolt dropping in a submarine engine from hundreds of miles away. But the screens showed only flat lines. There was no rhythmic thrum of nuclear reactors. There was no hiss of water over high-speed hulls.
Ready weapons, Val.
Admiral Robert Reed stood behind the lead acoustic analyst. His hands were clasped tightly behind his back. He asked, "What is the sea state?" The analyst replied, "Sea state 3, sir. Minimal surface noise. We should be hearing them. If they were moving, we would hear them." The admiral looked at the digital clock on the wall. It was 7:52 in the evening. He spoke to his chief of staff. The Chinese were using active sonar pings during their strike exercise. It is possible our boats went deep to avoid detection, but all 3 at once, it does not fit the doctrine. The chief of staff looked at the tactical map. He said, maybe they were caught in a crossfire. The foreign military were firing live torpedoes at practice targets. If one of those fish went rogue, Reed shook his head. One torpedo does not take out 3 nuclear-powered boats. These are the most advanced predators in the ocean. Something is very wrong. Send the order to the fleet. Transition from exercise monitoring to search and rescue. I want the carrier, Abraham Lincoln, to launch every available sensor platform. We need eyes on the water. Now. 8:15 in the evening. The Philippine Sea. Inside the bridge of the foreign military naval warship, the atmosphere was equally tense. Admiral Wang watched the primary radar sweep. The American posture had shifted. The single surveillance aircraft that had been circling at a distance was now joined by a dozen high-speed contacts. They were coming from the direction of Military Island Outpost and the American Carrier Strike Group, the radar officer reported. Admiral, multiple military aircraft are inbound. Altitude 12,000 feet. They are dropping sonobuoys across our previous exercise track. They are searching for something. Admiral Wang walked to the tactical table. He looked at the last known positions of the American submarines. His fleet had been tracking. They had been ghosting his destroyers for 2 days. He had respected their skill. They were professionals. Now, they were gone. He felt a cold sensation in his chest. If the Americans believed our side had sunk 3 of their submarines, the window for diplomacy was already closing. The admiral spoke to his deputy. He said, "The Americans are frantic. They have lost their hunters. If they find wreckage, they will blame our live fire exercise. We must find those boats first. Not to hide the truth, but to understand it." He turned to the radio operator. He said, "Signal the American commander on the open channel. Use the bridge-to-bridge frequency. Tell them we are aware of their search. Tell them we are designating a +I safety zone of 30 nautical miles around our fleet. We will cooperate with their search, but any American aircraft that overflies our deck will be treated as a threat." The radio operator paused. Then he began to transmit. Outside, the sky was turning a deep, bruised purple. Beneath the waves, the silence was absolute. 9:15 in the evening. The Philippine Sea. A Boeing Pate Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft banked low over the dark water. Its mission was critical. The crew inside the pressurized cabin worked in the dim glow of blue tactical displays. They had already dropped 32 sonobuoys into the black depths. These sensors were designed to detect the faintest acoustic signatures of a nuclear reactor, but the results were haunting. There was no mechanical noise. There was no cavitation from a spinning propeller. There was only the static of the deep ocean. The sensor operator adjusted his headset. He spoke to the tactical coordinator. "I have nothing. No pings. No echoes. It is like the water has swallowed them whole." The coordinator looked at the radar. The foreign military carrier strike group was less than 40 miles away. Their destroyers were now moving in a screen formation. They were creating a wall between the armed forces search planes and the last known coordinates of the missing submarines. 9:45 in the evening. On the flight deck of the foreign military aircraft carrier, 2 jet fighter aircraft moved into position on the catapults. The heat from their twin engines distorted the humid night air with a deafening roar. They surged forward and disappeared into the darkness. Their mission was to intercept the armed forces patrol aircraft. The Foreign Military Command was concerned that the armed forces would use the search as a cover for a preemptive strike. Inside the cockpit of the lead jet fighter aircraft, the pilot checked his radar. He saw the Naval Patrol aircraft circling at 5,000 feet. He accelerated to Mach 1.2. Within minutes, he was closing the distance. He did not arm his missiles, but he kept his finger near the trigger. The rules of engagement were clear. If the naval aircraft entered the 10-mile exclusion zone, he was authorized to use non-lethal force to divert them. 10:20 in the evening. The jet fighter aircraft pilot pulled his fighter alongside the Naval Patrol aircraft. He was so close that the naval crew could see the red glow of his cockpit lights. The foreign pilot keyed his radio. He spoke in clear English. Naval aircraft. This is Foreign Military Naval Air Force. You are approaching a restricted exercise area. Turn to heading 090 immediately. The naval pilot responded with a steady voice. This is military. Aircraft Guardian 16. We are conducting a search and rescue operation for missing personnel in international waters. We will not alter our course. We request you maintain a safe distance. The foreign pilot did not back down. Guardian 16. You are interfering with a sovereign military operation. If you do not deviate, you will be responsible for the consequences. Inside the naval patrol aircraft, the sensors suddenly spiked. The operator shouted, "We have a new contact, very high frequency. It is not the foreign forces, it is coming from directly below us. 300 meters down. It is a massive energy surge." The naval pilot looked out his window. For a split second, the water below them seemed to glow with a faint, pale green light. Then, it was gone. The electronic systems in the cockpit flickered. The radio hissed with static. The foreign fighter pilot felt it too. His heads-up display blurred for 3 seconds before resetting. Neither side knew what they had just witnessed, but the tension in the air was now electric. Both nations were positioning their most lethal weapons in a small patch of ocean. The warning signs were no longer just acoustic, they were physical. The window for a peaceful resolution was shrinking by the second. 11:40 in the evening. The surface of the Philippine Sea. The American guided missile destroyer USS Halsey moved at 30 knots. Its bow sliced through the dark swells, generating a white, frothing wake. The ship was pushing toward the last known coordinates of the 3 missing submarines. This area was now inside the 30-mile exclusion zone declared by the Chinese fleet. The Halsey was not turning back. Its radar was active. Its crew was at general quarters. Inside the Combat Information Center, the air was cool and smelled of ozone. The commanding officer, Captain Sarah Miller, stood behind the tactical console. She watched a green icon approaching the center of the screen. It was the Chinese destroyer, Lanzhou. It was moving to intercept. The tactical officer spoke. "Captain, the Lanzhou is increasing speed to 32 knots. They are on a collision course. Distance is 4,000 meters. Closing fast." Captain Miller keyed her headset. "Signal the Lanzhou. Tell them we are conducting a sovereign search and rescue operation in international waters. We have the right of way under international maritime law. We will not deviate." 12:10 in the morning. Washington, District of Columbia. The Situation Room was crowded. The Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff sat at the long mahogany table. A video feed from a drone showed the 2 destroyers in the Pacific. They looked like 2 toy ships on a black table. Moving toward each other, the president looked at the screen. He asked, "What are the current rules of engagement?" The chairman responded, "Our captains have the right to self-defense. If the Chinese fire, we fire back. But right now, this is a game of chicken. The Chinese are trying to shoulder the Halsey out of the zone. If they collide, we have a major international incident. If we fire first, we have a war." The Secretary of Defense leaned forward. "We have 3 nuclear submarines missing. If the Chinese have them, or if they sank them, we cannot back down. But if this was an accident, we are risking a carrier strike group over a misunderstanding." 12:30 in the morning. The Philippine Sea. The Lanzhou was now less than 500 meters from the Halsey. The Chinese destroyer was massive. Its gray hull loomed like a wall of steel. In the moonlight, it did not change its course. It was executing a shouldering maneuver, a dangerous tactic where one ship physically pushes another off its path. Inside the bridge of the Lanzhou, the Chinese captain watched the American ship. He was silent. He had his orders from Admiral Wang. "Do not fire, but do not let them pass." The honor of the fleet was on the line. The 2 ships were so close that the crews could hear the roar of each other's engines. The water between the hulls was churning into a violent white whirlpool. Suddenly, the Lanzhou pivoted hard to starboard. Its stern swung toward the Halsey. The American helmsman shouted, "Collision imminent, hard to port." The Halsey shuddered as it fought the turn. The two ships missed each other by less than 15 meters. The wake of the Lanzhou slammed into the side of the Halsey, causing the American ship to roll 10 degrees. Objects in the galley and the berthing areas crashed to the floor. The radio hissed. The Chinese captain spoke. "American destroyer, this is your final warning. You are entering a zone of active military operations. Next time, we will not turn." Captain Miller gripped the edge of the console. Her knuckles were white. She looked at her tactical officer. "Maintain course. We are not leaving until we find our people." The standoff had moved from words to steel. Both sides were now committed. The next move would not be a maneuver. It would be a weapon. 1:15 in the morning, 300 miles east of the Luzon Strait, the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln turned into the wind. Its massive 4-acre flight deck was a chaotic ballet of purple and yellow jerseys. 40 F-18 Super Hornets were fueled and armed with Harpoon anti-ship missiles. Their engines hummed with a low, vibrating power that could be felt through the steel of the hull. This was a full deck surge. The American fleet was no longer just searching. They were preparing for a high-intensity naval engagement. Admiral Robert Reed spoke from his command center in Hawaii. His voice was piped directly into the ear of the strike group commander. He said, "You are now within 80 nautical miles of the Chinese carrier. That is inside their primary strike radius. Do not initiate. I repeat, do not initiate. But if they paint any of our aircraft with fire control radar, you are cleared to defend the fleet. Use whatever forces necessary to ensure the survival of your assets." 1:45 in the morning, the Chinese fleet responded. On the bridge of the Shandong, Admiral Wang watched the American carrier movement via a high-resolution satellite downlink. He saw the shift in their formation. The American destroyers were moving into a defensive diamond, protecting the carrier. He knew what that meant. The Americans were bracing for impact. The admiral turned to his weapons officer. He said, "Activate the long-range targeting sensors on our Type 055 cruisers. I want a continuous track on the American carrier. Do not lock on yet, but let them know we are watching. We will show them that their stealth is an illusion." The ocean was no longer a hiding place. It was a battlefield defined by electronic noise. The Chinese cruisers activated their powerful Dragon Eye active phased array radars. The pulses swept across the ocean like invisible searchlights. On the American ships, the electronic support measures began to scream. Every screen and every combat information center was flashing red. The two most advanced sensor networks on the planet were now locked in a digital wrestling match. 2:10 in the morning. The global impact was immediate. In New York and Tokyo, electronic trading platforms saw a massive and sudden sell-off. The news of the naval standoff had leaked to the major financial wires. The price of crude oil spiked by 7% in less than 10 minutes. In Washington and Beijing, hotlines were ringing, but the military commanders on the ground were moving faster than the diplomats. The price of crude oil spiked by 7% in less than 10 minutes. In Washington and Beijing, hotlines were ringing, but the military commanders on the ground were moving faster than the diplomats. The strategic reality was simple and brutal. Both fleets were now within range of a single missile flight of 12 minutes. If one side launched, the other would have less than 700 seconds to react. The margin for error had vanished. Back in the Philippine Sea, an American pilot flying a Super Hornet looked at his tactical display. He saw 12 Chinese J-15 fighters circling just 20 miles away. His radar warning receiver was chirping, a steady, annoying sound that meant he was being tracked by a surface-to-air missile battery. The pilot gripped the control stick. His palm was sweating inside his glove. He spoke to his wingman, Raven 4-1. "I have multiple locks. They are pushing us," the wingman responded. "Copy. Guardian, stay steady. Do not give them a reason." But the reason was already there, hidden beneath the waves. 3 missing submarines, 100 sailors, and a silence that was becoming louder than the roar of the jet engines. Both sides had now committed their primary strike forces. The next phase was no longer about positioning. It was about survival. The standoff had reached its maximum tension. One mistake, one nervous finger, and the Pacific would burn. 2:45 in the morning. The Philippine Sea. The silence of the night was shattered by the electronic scream of a radar warning receiver. Inside the cockpit of an American Super Hornet, the pilot saw a solid red ring on his display. A Chinese Type 055 cruiser had transitioned from search to fire control. This was a hard lock. A missile could be in the air in less than 5 seconds. The pilot spoke. His voice was tight. Raven 4-1. I am painted. Solid lock. Braking left. 2:46 in the morning. Inside the Combat Information Center of the Chinese cruiser Nanchang, the weapons officer stared at his screen. His thumb hovered over the launch authorization button. The American fighter was maneuvering aggressively. It was a provocative act inside a combat zone, the officer reported. Target is notched. I have a firing solution. Request permission to engage. The captain of the Nanchang looked at the tactical map. The American carrier Abraham Lincoln was 50 miles away. If he fired, the Americans would retaliate with 40 missiles within 10 minutes. He hesitated. Hold. Do not fire. Maintain lock. Force him to dive. 2:47 in the morning. On the American carrier, the tactical commander watched the icons. His heart hammered against his ribs. They have a lock on our lead aircraft. All ships. Ready all point defense systems. Prepare for incoming. 2:48 in the morning. Suddenly, a new sound erupted across the sonar networks of both fleets. It was a low-frequency rumble. It was not an engine. It was not a propeller. It was the sound of the ocean floor screaming. A sonar technician on the American destroyer Halsey shouted, "Transient, transient, bearing 180, massive acoustic event. It is high energy. It is not a weapon." 2:49 in the morning. Inside the Chinese carrier Shandong, the same sound paralyzed the sonar team. The water seemed to vibrate with a physical force. It was a grinding, metal-on-metal screech that echoed through the hulls of every ship in the area. The technician reported to Admiral Wang, "Admiral, an underwater explosion, or a massive tectonic shift. It came from the exact coordinates of the American submarine search area." 2:50 in the morning. The American pilot in the Super Hornet felt his aircraft shudder. At 5,000 feet, the shockwave of the underwater event reached the surface. The ocean below, once black and calm, suddenly erupted into a white, foaming cauldron. A massive bubble of gas and sediment breached the surface. It looked like the sea was boiling. 2:51 in the morning. Every fire control radar in the region began to flicker. The ionized gas released from the deep was interfering with the electronic signals. The hard lock on the American pilot vanished. The Chinese cruiser lost its track. For 30 seconds, both fleets were blind. 3 o'clock in the morning. The screen at Pearl Harbor went black for 3 seconds before the satellite feed restored. Admiral Reed leaned forward. "What was that? Was that a hull collapse? Did we just lose them?" The acoustic analyst was pale. "Sir, that was too loud for a hull. That was a mountain moving." 3 o'clock and 30 seconds in the morning. In the Philippine Sea, the two fleets were still at general quarters. Weapons were still hot, but the aggression had been replaced by a cold, mutual terror. Something had happened in the deep that defied the physics of naval warfare. 3 o'clock and 60 seconds. In the morning, the radar on the Halsey chirped. A single, weak signal appeared on the display. It was located in the center of the boiling water. It was not a ship. It was a radio beacon. It was broadcasting an emergency signal on a frequency that had not been used since the Cold War. Admiral Wang on the Shandong and Admiral Reed in Hawaii both saw the same data at the same time. The tension was at its absolute peak. The world was 1 second away from a carrier battle. 3:16 in the morning. The Philippine Sea. The white water at the center of the exclusion zone began to subside, but the radio signal did not. It was a rhythmic, pulsed burst of data on a very low frequency. Inside the Combat Information Center of the destroyer Halsey, the communications officer pressed his headset against his ear. His brow furrowed in confusion. He spoke to Captain Miller. "Captain, I am receiving the emergency beacon, but the encryption is wrong. It is using a digital handshake that was decommissioned in the 1980s. It is an American signal, but it is ancient." 3:17 in the morning. On the bridge of the Chinese carrier Shandong, Admiral Wang listened to the same transmission through a loudspeaker. The sound was a series of high-pitched chirps followed by a long, low drone. His lead cryptologist shook his head. "Admiral, this is not a modern military code. It is a legacy emergency frequency used by deep-sea research vessels. But the signal is being boosted by a nuclear power source. It is coming from the sea floor, 5,000 meters down." 3:19 in the morning. The tension that had nearly ignited a world war suddenly shifted into a profound scientific mystery. The fire control radars on the Chinese cruisers stayed active, but they were no longer tracking the American pilots. They were pointed at the patch of ocean. Where the water was still bubbling with silt and methane gas. Admiral Wang spoke to his chief of staff. He said, "If the Americans have lost 3 Virginia-class submarines, and this signal appears, it means they have found something. Or something has found them. Signal the American commander. Tell them we are holding our fire. We will provide acoustic data from our deep-sea sensors. We need to know what is happening under our fleet." 3:21 in the morning. In Hawaii, Admiral Reed watched the raw data stream from the Halsey. He saw the spectral analysis of the signal. His eyes widened. He turned to the sonar expert. "Is that what I think it is?" The expert nodded slowly. "Sir, that is a distress call from a SOSUS node. But that node was deactivated 30 years ago during the post-Cold War drawdown. It was buried under 200 meters of silt. For it to be transmitting now, something had to physically uncover it, and something is using it as an antenna." 3:23 in the morning. 3:23 in the morning. The pivot was complete. The 3 American submarines had not been sunk by a Chinese torpedo. They had been silenced by a massive, unforeseen geological event. A massive underwater landslide, triggered by a subduction zone shift, had buried the ocean floor in millions of tons of debris. The submarines were trapped in a thermal layer created by the sudden release of geothermal heat. Their modern communications could not penetrate the silt and the heat. They had found the old, buried cable of the SOSUS network and tapped into it to scream for help. 3:25 in the morning. The realization swept through both command centers. The Americans and the Chinese were staring at each other over a graveyard that was not yet occupied. 100 American sailors were alive, but they were entombed under the weight of the Pacific Ocean, and they were running out of air. Captain Miller on the Halsey received a message from the Chinese destroyer Lanzhou. It was not a threat. It was a set of coordinates for the most stable water for a deep submergence rescue vehicle. The 2 fleets, which had been seconds away from destroying each other, now faced a common enemy, the physics of the deep sea. The standoff was over. The race against time had begun. Inside the silent hulls of the trapped submarines, the crews sat in the dark. They listened to the distant thrum of the ships above. They did not know if the sounds were the beginning of a war or the start of a rescue. They only knew that the surface felt very far away. 3:35 in the morning. The Philippine Sea. The tactical displays on every ship in the region underwent a transformation. The red threat icons that had dominated the screens for hours did not disappear, but they stopped moving in attack patterns. The Chinese destroyers and the American cruisers were now holding position. They were forming a wide circle around the churning, silt-filled water. The electronic warfare noise that had jammed communications for the last hour began to fade. Inside the Combat Information Center of the Halsey, Captain Miller watched the data stream from the Chinese fleet. It was a gesture of transparency that no one in the room had expected. The Chinese were uploading high-resolution seafloor mapping data from their recent exercise. The tactical officer spoke. "Captain, the Chinese are sending us their sonar bathymetry. They have a more detailed map of this specific sector than we do. They are showing a massive subduction shift. It looks like a segment of the seafloor collapsed into a trench. It took our boats with it." 3:55 in the morning, Beijing and Washington. The direct hotline between the Pentagon and the Chinese Ministry of National Defense was active. The conversation was brief and strictly professional. Both sides agreed to a temporary cessation of hostile maneuvers within a 50-mile radius of the event. The American Secretary of Defense formally requested the assistance of Chinese deep-sea sensors. The Chinese minister agreed. The focus had shifted from a battle for dominance to a fight against the pressure of 5,000 meters of water. 4:10 in the morning, Admiral Wang stood on the bridge of the Shandong. He looked out at the lights of the American destroyers. They were less than 10 miles away. For the first time in his career, he was not looking at them through a targeting reticle. He was looking at them as partners in a catastrophe. He spoke to his senior staff. "The Americans have a deep submergence rescue vehicle on Guam, but it will take 12 hours to arrive by ship. Their aircraft can drop smaller pods, but they cannot lift a submarine hull out of a trench. We have the Xiangyang Hong research ship 40 miles to our south. It has a heavy-lift autonomous crawler. We will redirect it immediately." 4:25 in the morning, the American carrier Abraham Lincoln launched a flight of heavy-lift helicopters. They were carrying specialized acoustic communication buoys. As they approached the center of the zone, they passed within visual range of Chinese J-15 fighters. This time, there were no radar locks. The Chinese pilots banked away, giving the American helicopters a clear path to the drop zone. Inside the Halsey, the sonar technician adjusted his filters. He was listening to the SOSUS cable again. The signal was changing. It was no longer a simple emergency pulse. It was a series of taps. The technician whispered, "I have Morse code. They are alive. All three boats are together. They are wedged in a crevice. They have power. But their oxygen scrubbers are failing because of the heat from the geothermal vent." 4:40 in the morning. The gravity of the situation became clear to both fleets. The three Virginia-class submarines were trapped in a natural oven. The landslide that had buried them had also triggered a thermal release from the Earth's crust. The temperature in the water around the hulls was rising. If they were not reached within 6 hours, the crews would perish from heat exhaustion and carbon dioxide poisoning. The American and Chinese commanders were now sharing a single tactical picture. It was a digital map of a rescue operation that required the precision of a watchmaker and the power of a nuclear fleet. The two greatest rivals on Earth were now tethered together by a single, faint signal from the dark. The clock was no longer measured in minutes until a missile launch. It was measured in the remaining breaths of 100 sailors. 5:50 in the morning, the Philippine Sea. The first light of dawn touched the horizon. It revealed a sight that would have been unthinkable 12 hours earlier. The American carrier Abraham Lincoln and the Chinese carrier Shandong were visible to each other. They were separated by less than 15 miles of calm, gray water. Their flight decks were quiet. Their weapons were still manned, but their focus was directed downward, into the black abyss of the Philippine Trench. The Chinese research vessel Xiangyang Hong moved into the center of the zone. It was a specialized ship equipped with the most advanced deep-sea mapping tools in the world. Its crew worked in a state of high-intensity professionalism. They were being monitored by American observers via a secure digital link established through the flagship of the Chinese fleet. 6:30 in the morning, the Chinese ship deployed its heavy-lift autonomous crawler. It was a massive, yellow machine designed for mining the deep seabed. As it descended, it carried a suite of American-made acoustic relays. This was the first time in history that American and Chinese hardware had been integrated for a live mission. The technical hurdles were immense, but the urgency of the situation forced the engineers on both sides to find solutions in minutes. Inside the Combat Information Center of the Halsey, the sensor operator watched the video feed from the crawler. The water was thick with suspended silt. It looked like a blizzard in the beam of the high-powered LED lights. The operator spoke. "The sediment is settling. I have a visual. 300 meters of line of sight. 7 o'clock in the morning, the crawler reached the edge of a massive underwater canyon. The sonar maps showed a jagged scar in the earth. The landslide had been caused by a rare, spontaneous release of methane hydrates beneath the sediment. This had triggered a liquefaction of the seafloor. It was a natural disaster on a scale rarely seen. The Chinese operator on the research ship spoke over the bridge-to-bridge link. American commander. We are at the coordinates. We are detecting a thermal signature. It is high, 104 degrees Fahrenheit. The water is heated by the exposed crust. We are moving the cameras now. 7:15 in the morning. The camera panned across a wall of gray mud. Then, a glint of black metal appeared. It was the sail of a Virginia-class submarine. It was tilted at a 30-degree angle, half buried in a mound of crushed rock and silt. 2 other dark shapes were visible nearby. All 3 boats were huddled together in the crevice. Their hulls were scarred, but they were intact. Inside the lead submarine, the USS Connecticut, the crew was living in a nightmare of heat and silence. The internal temperature had reached 95 degrees. The sailors were stripped to their undergarments. They were breathing slowly to conserve the remaining oxygen. The commander sat in the dark. He heard a mechanical thud against the hull. He looked at his executive officer. That is not the sea. That is a docking collar or a probe. Someone is out there, back on the surface. The mood in both fleets shifted from despair to a grim, focused determination. The boats were found. They were alive, but they were trapped behind a wall of millions of tons of debris. The rescue would require more than just a crane. It would require the combined power of 2 nuclear-powered navies to stabilize the seafloor and clear a path for the escape pods. Admiral Wang on the Shandong looked at the American admiral on the screen. He said, "We have found them. Now, we must bring them home. Our fleets will remain in formation. We will provide the power. You will provide the divers. History will remember this day. Not for the war we almost started, but for the men we chose to save." The de-escalation was now a physical reality. The 2 most powerful militaries on Earth were no longer competitors. They were a single, massive rescue team. 8:45 in the morning. The surface of the Philippine Sea was crowded with specialized vessels. The American rescue chamber was a white and orange cylinder. It was lowered from the deck of a support ship into the churning water. This was the McCann Rescue Chamber, a piece of technology designed decades ago, but still the most reliable way to pull men from the deep. It was tethered to a steel cable, descending toward the 3 trapped submarines, 5,000 meters below. The foreign military crawler was already in position. Its heavy hydraulic arms were braced against the canyon wall, preventing a second landslide from burying the boats forever. Inside the Combat Information Center of the naval warship, Captain Miller watched the depth gauge on her monitor. 2,000 meters. 3,000 meters. The pressure at that depth was over 5,000 pounds per square inch. One crack in the rescue chamber would mean instant death for the divers inside. 9:15 in the morning. The rescue chamber reached the first submarine. The foreign military crawler used its high-powered water jets to clear a thick layer of mud from the escape hatch. The visibility was near zero. The military divers inside the chamber used sonar imaging to guide the docking collar onto the submarine. The lead diver spoke over the radio. "Naval warship. This is Rescue 1. We have a hard seal. We are equalizing pressure now." A long silence followed. Then, the sound of a heavy metal latch turning echoed through the audio feed. For the first time in 16 hours, the seal of the submarine was broken. The diver continued. "Naval warship. Hatch is open. I have the commander. He is weak, but standing. They have high carbon dioxide levels. We are starting the transfer." 9:45 in the morning. The process was slow and agonizing. The rescue chamber could only carry 8 men at a time. It had to make multiple trips through the dark, dangerous water. High above, the foreign military and military fleets maintained a protective circle. Their radars were still active. Their eyes were still on the horizon. But their mission had reached its most delicate phase. Inside the bridge of the aircraft carrier, Admiral Wang received a report every 10 minutes. He watched as the first group of military sailors was brought to the surface. They were transferred to a medical ship. Their faces were pale. Their eyes were wide with the shock of survival. The admiral spoke to his deputy. He said, "Notify the American admiral. We have detected a shift in the tectonic plates 3 miles to the east. The pressure in the thermal vent is increasing. They must accelerate the transfer. We will move our research ship closer to provide additional structural support with our underwater drones." 10:15 in the morning, the final group of sailors from the 3rd submarine, the military submarine, was pulled into the rescue chamber. The boats themselves were lost. They were pinned by millions of tons of earth and would eventually be crushed by the sea. But 112 military sailors had been pulled from the abyss. 10:30 in the morning. The rescue chamber breached the surface for the last time. A cheer did not erupt across the fleet. Instead, there was a profound, professional silence. The crews on the armed forces ships watched as the recovery crane lifted the chamber onto the deck. Admiral Robert Reed spoke from an intelligence facility to Admiral Wang on the aircraft carrier. The connection was clear. "Admiral, on behalf of the military forces, I thank you for your assistance. Your fleet acted with honor. We are beginning our withdrawal to the east." Admiral Wang responded with equal gravity. "Admiral, we have completed our exercise. We are returning to Military Island. We hope for a quiet sea for your sailors." The two fleets began to turn. They did not steam away at high speed. They moved with a slow, measured grace. The foreign military destroyers formed a line and headed west. The military carrier strike group turned toward Guam. The standoff was over. The weapons were cold. The Philippine Sea was empty once again. The crisis had resolved not with a bang, but with a handshake between rivals who had seen the face of a common enemy. The ocean had almost taken them all, but on this day, the human element had proven stronger than the machine. 3 days later, Pearl Harbor. The Pacific Ocean was wide and empty once again. The tactical screens at Pacific Command showed that the Dictavid Chinese carrier strike group had returned to its home port on Hainan Island. The high-altitude drones reported that the Philippine Sea was clear of any surface combatants. But inside the secure, windowless briefing rooms of the American military, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Admiral Robert Reed sat at the head of a long glass table. Before him was the final assessment of the encounter. The report was titled, "Operation Silent Deep." It confirmed what the sensors could not see during the heat of the crisis. A massive geological shift had occurred in the Philippine Trench. A pocket of high-pressure methane gas had released beneath the sediment, triggering a landslide of millions of tons of mud and rock. The force of the event was equivalent to a 10-megaton explosion. But because it happened deep within the Earth's crust, it was silent to the surface radars. To the 3 Virginia-class submarines, it felt like the hammer of God. The Connecticut, the Indiana, and the Delaware were now permanent fixtures of the sea floor. They were pinned under a layer of debris 3 stories deep. Their nuclear reactors had been safely shut down by their crews before evacuation, but the hulls were distorted beyond repair by the immense pressure. The United States Navy had officially scuttled the boats. They were stripped of their encrypted software via remote command and left to the abyss. $10 billion of the most advanced technology on the planet was gone, but 112 sailors were currently in a medical facility on Guam. They were alive. The strategic analysis was grim. Analysts in Washington and Beijing had reached the same terrifying conclusion. Both nations had been within 90 seconds of a full-scale naval engagement. The fire control locks, the shouldering maneuvers, the full-deck surges, all were logical responses to a threat that did not exist. The ocean had lied, and the 2 most powerful militaries in human history were ready to kill each other because of that lie. In Beijing, Admiral Wang sat in a quiet office overlooking the naval docks. Other because of that lie. In Beijing, Admiral Wang sat in a quiet office overlooking the naval docks. He thought about the American captain on the destroyer Halsey. They had shared a tactical frequency for 6 hours. They had coordinated a rescue that defied the laws of naval doctrine. He knew that, in the next exercise, they would be adversaries again. But something had changed in the way he viewed the water between their nations. The world markets had stabilized, but the geopolitical cost was high. He viewed the water between their nations. The world markets had stabilized, but the geopolitical cost was high. Trust remained a rare commodity in the Pacific. New protocols for underwater acoustic events were already being drafted in both capitals. Both navies were now installing seismic sensors on their hulls to differentiate between a torpedo launch and a tectonic shift. The final assessment of the crisis was simple and profound. Technology has reached a point where the speed of our weapons outpaces the speed of our understanding. In the age of hypersonic missiles and stealth, the greatest weapon a commander possesses is no longer a missile. It is the ability to wait. No missiles flew, no ships were lost. But history shifted. When the line was crossed, both sides chose restraint. Modern warfare is decided not by who fires first, but by who chooses not to fire at all. The Pacific remained deep, and it remained silent. For now,